Good day, everybody. So this lecture is going to be the beginning of the topic of childbirth and some of the first, some information from the very first year of life in the newborn. Your chapter appears to take this all the way through the first 3 years, but as I've indicated, that's an awful lot of stuff to try to cover in one topic. So I'm going to limit this series of lectures and this collection of activities to just the first year, to infancy and the whole process of childbirth. So as I've kind of mentioned before, we don't go in exactly the same order as your textbook, but it is a good idea to have your textbook handy or references. I have mine right in front of me. So one of the things that I think is important, oh, and I forgot to set my timer. One of the things that I think is important to point out in this topic is that childbirth and what is considered normal or typical practices has changed over time. And it's interesting that even in my sociology class, we talk about how one of the things that's happened with the process of delivering babies or bringing babies into the world is it's become a masculinized and a capitalistic process. So like one of the, we make reference to that this has historically been a female social ritual, historically, and in some lesser industrialized regions of the world, it still is so. It's an experience that's only shared by women, and men don't really have any part of it. Somewhere through American history or world history, it became more of a masculine-dominated occupation. And historians argue or claim that as the industry, the medical industry evolved and more men went into medicine, that some of the women accused of being witches were in fact midwives and doulas. I do think there is sort of a slight trend to return to that process. I mean, after all, women have been delivering babies for, as long as we've been on the planet. So it's not like we're not built for this, but as it shifted out of the role of women, it did become more medicalized and more industrialized. And when I was born in 1971, it was women were literally being like knocked unconscious. They were general anesthesia. And if you think about that, like how are you going to push an 8-pound baby out of your uterus if you can't push, right? But and there is sort of a revival of it. And I'd just like to make a plug that this should be an informed decision that every woman should make for herself in consultation with medical professionals, if she trusts them, that she trusts. But it should be her decision ultimately, and not the insurance companies or not what's convenient for the doctors necessarily. Okay, so there's my little soapbox. So just some terms on this slide, what they mean. So we have Lamaze practice, which is simply where you practice the breathing techniques, you try to imagine what it would be like in the process. And really it's about being informed. It's about knowing what you're getting into and what your options are and what your complications might be, because it can be a pretty traumatic. I know I had 2 children and I really wanted a natural, I wanted as little medical intervention as possible. Oh, looky there, I have no idea what's going on my screen. And I didn't get that in either case. My son was born cesarean section at 36 weeks because he had a birth defect that they knew about. And my daughter was what do you call that? I was going to say stimulated. She was she was induced, which also can be more painful than the natural process. And she didn't want to come out. So they had to use like the suction on her head and pull her out. So I didn't get what I wanted in either case. And I found the second time to be incredibly painful. The first one, which was the cesarean section, I actually recovered from faster. And that's just a great way to sort of segue. One of the things that the assignments that I ask in this chapter is that you learn a little bit about your birthing process, like how were you born, how long was your mother in labor? Sort of a side note, I realize some students are estranged from their maternal family or they're adopted and they don't have any of that information. So this may be the assignment that you choose to drop. If you do have access to somebody, it can be a really interesting conversation to have. Call your aunt, maybe, or your mother. Many mothers, most mothers would just love to talk about it. And I was just having this conversation with a 20-year-old. She's like, oh, I had no idea. Well, of course not. Why would, why do you typically know unless you have to write an assignment for your human growth and development class? Okay, so there's also like this fancy term here called hypno birthing, which is, would be kind of a self-guided meditation. Water birthing, which I thought was really cool. I have read different things that say that there's really lots of, it's very germy, but the idea is that you use water to sort of lighten the pregnant body can get very heavy, but it's like a therapeutic setting, and you literally give birth in water. And some argue, or some can suggest that the baby might drown, but the baby's already in fluid, so it just doesn't take its first breath. Anyway, I don't know, you have to read up on that. I just thought it sounded really cool. There's midwives, which are typically nurses, and then doulas, which might be a nurse, but not necessarily a doula, acts as sort of a mentor. Your textbook talks about doulas. The research does suggest that when we have doulas, and certainly midwives, that the labor and delivery, and labor is the contractions, right, that try to push that baby out, that labor and delivery are smoother with doulas. Obstetricians are just a medically fancy term for a doctor that specializes in delivering babies, which is different than a gynecologist. A gynecologist is specialized in her gynecological system, like her uterus and her vagina. The obstetrician is specialized in the delivery of the baby. Most gynecologists, OB, so most of them are the OB, which is the obstetrician, OB-GYN, which is the gynecologist. Most of them are the same. I actually don't know. I don't know any of that are distinction. So here's just sort of some interesting data. The turn of the century, only about 5 people were born in hospitals. Today, the majority are born in hospitals. I'd be curious to see how that is, in 2020. I think I put this slideshow together in like 2015. And then we over here, so often when you advocate for a home birth or a midwife birth, people will point out the maternal death rate, or the infant death rate. But here's an interesting statistic. Maternal death refers to the death by women during the process of labor and delivery. And you'll notice that since 1979, the rate of women who die post or during the labor and delivery process has actually gone up. I don't know if it's in your textbook, or maybe I saw it on NPR or something, but there was a story about how one of the things that's actually happening is that more mothers are dying within the first few days after the child is born, because their argument is that the current medical institution puts a disproportionate amount of attention on the well-being of the baby, and not enough well-being, and not enough attention on the well-being of the mother. So she may develop infections, internal bleeding, but whatever the case is, that we're letting more mothers die after labor and delivery than used to, because we've shifted our emphasis, they say, and that there's just not enough attention given to her. I mean, think about it. This is a really physiologically dramatic process that she's undergoing. I mean, this is very hard. And, my mother reminded me after my second child was born that more women die. Like childbirth is the most dangerous time, naturally occurring event in a woman's life, right? So we should not forget. It's also very dangerous for babies. And some, have reminded us that that historically more women died in childbirth than really any other thing. And they've pointed out, maybe this is why, I think we said in the previous chapter, that more boy babies are born than girl babies. No, I said that wrong. Anyway, forget that, just delete that. Never mind. But okay, I'm getting excited. Oh, there you go. And why are there more women dying after childbirth? They claim that women are older, complications with obesity, preeclampsia. So this is a special kind of high blood pressure that happens only to pregnant women, bleeding to death, hemorrhaging. And then in some cases, it's simply poor women who don't have access to health care. I'm going to stop this video because I'm at 10 minutes. When I come back, I want to talk about the different kinds of labor and delivery that you can choose.